Hey guys, welcome to Sleeping Stone Whispers Crescent Moon. Tonight's story slowly explores why royal clothing changed very slowly, moving gently through centuries of quiet palaces, repeated traditions, and familiar garments worn generation after generation. Nothing rushes here, each part drifts calmly through soft fabrics, steady routines, and the peaceful boredom of royal life. This is a story where change happens so slowly that your mind can finally rest. If you enjoy falling asleep while learning something simple and soothing, this long, unhurried journey is made just for you. So settle in, let your thoughts slow down, and if this kind of calm storytelling helps you relax, please like the video, subscribe to Sleeping Stone Whispers, and stay with us for many more quiet nights sleeping phase. The quiet world of royal wardrobes begins far away from noise, far from excitement, and far from anything that changes quickly. In long stone palaces, behind heavy doors that rarely creak, clothing waited patiently. It did not hurry. It did not ask to be noticed. It simply existed, folded neatly, hung carefully, and returned to again and again. Royal wardrobes were not places of creativity. They were places of calm repetition. The same colors rested beside each other year after year. Deep reds, slow blues, muted golds that never tried to shine too brightly. These garments were not chosen to impress anyone new. They were chosen to reassure everyone old. Each morning in a royal household began almost exactly the same way. Servants moved quietly. Curtains were drawn slowly. And the clothes brought forward were familiar, expected, and comforting. Nothing surprising waited on the hanger. Nothing bold interrupted the rhythm of the day. In this world, clothing was not a form of self-expression. It was a form of stability. A king did not wake up wondering what to wear. A queen did not debate between styles. The decision had already been made, often decades earlier. Sometimes centuries earlier. Royal wardrobes were built on the idea that sameness meant strength. When people looked at their ruler, they were meant to feel that nothing had shifted overnight. The clothing helped with that. If the robe looked the same as it did last year, and the year before that, then perhaps the world itself was still steady. Fabric mattered, but not fashion. The cut of a sleeve was repeated because it had already proven acceptable. The length of a coat remained unchanged because it had once been approved by tradition. Even small adjustments were approached carefully, slowly, and often avoided entirely. Inside these wardrobes, time seemed to move differently. While cities outside changed, markets evolved, and trends came and went, the royal clothes waited quietly. They were brushed, repaired, and returned to their place. Nothing dramatic happened to them. And that was exactly the point. The people responsible for these garments, tailors, attendants, keepers of fabric, understood the rules well. Their job was not to invent. Their job was to preserve. A successful day meant that nothing looked new. Nothing looked strange. Everything looked exactly as it should. Colors were chosen once and then remembered forever. Shapes were copied from older shapes. Embroidery followed patterns drawn long ago by hands that were no longer remembered. The clothes carried history, but they carried it gently, without movement. Royal wardrobes were quiet rooms. Not just because people whispered inside them, but because nothing inside demanded attention. No loud colors. No sudden changes. No excitement. Just the soft sound of fabric being folded and unfolded, again and again. This quietness extended into the halls of the palace. When rulers appeared before others, their clothing spoke in a calm, steady voice. It said, "We are the same as before. Nothing has changed." And for many people, that was enough. In this way, royal clothing became part of a larger stillness. It supported routines. It supported ceremonies. It supported the slow turning of years that felt almost identical to one another. The wardrobe did not mark time, it softened it. And so, in the quiet world of royal wardrobes, change learned to move very slowly. So slowly that most people never noticed it at all. As the centuries passed, these clothes continued to wait, resting in silence, doing exactly what they were meant to do, remain unchanged, and keep everything else feeling calm. There was a long time when clothing was not about looking new, interesting, or stylish. It was about order. Quiet order. Predictable order. Clothing existed to show where someone stood, not who they wished to be. In royal courts, garments were carefully arranged like rules written in fabric. Each piece had a purpose, and that purpose rarely changed. A robe was worn because it had always been worn. A color was chosen because it had already been accepted. Nothing was meant to surprise anyone. Fashion, as an idea, had little place here. Fashion suggests movement, curiosity, and change. Royal clothing avoided all three. Instead, it focused on balance. Balance between ranks. Balance between tradition and expectation. Balance that kept everything calm. When a ruler entered a room, people did not look to admire creativity. They looked to confirm familiarity. The clothes reassured them. Sleeves fell where they were supposed to. Colors stayed within their limits. Shapes remained unchanged, like symbols carved into stone. Clothing helped organize the world without words. A certain fabric meant authority. A certain length meant restraint. A certain decoration meant permission. Everyone understood these signals, and because they were understood, they were not altered. Tailors were not designers. They were caretakers of order. Their work was measured against the past, not the future. Success meant accuracy, precision, repetition. The best garment was the one no one noticed as new. Rules governed what could be worn, when it could be worn, and by whom. These rules were followed quietly. There was comfort in knowing exactly what was expected. There was calm in not needing to decide. Clothing removed uncertainty from daily life. When everything already had a place, nothing needed to be questioned. This was especially important in royal settings, where even small confusion could feel dangerous. Over time, garments became uniforms of stability. They told a steady story: the world is still arranged. Roles are still clear. Nothing has slipped out of place. And so, when clothing meant order rather than fashion, change became unnecessary. Stillness became valuable. And the quiet repetition of familiar garments helped hold everything together, one slow day at a time. Kings lived in a world where uncertainty was never far away. Decisions carried weight, and even small mistakes could echo loudly. Because of this, anything that already worked was treated with great care. Clothing was no exception. What had worked before was trusted. A robe that had been worn during peaceful years felt safer than an untested one. A familiar crown sat more comfortably than a new design. Kings did not look for improvement in their clothing, they looked for reassurance. Wearing the same styles again and again created a sense of continuity. It suggested that today was connected to yesterday. That the present was not breaking away from the past. This connection mattered deeply, even if it was never spoken aloud. New clothing introduced questions. Would people accept it? Would it send the wrong message? Would it appear careless or proud? These questions were unnecessary risks. Familiar garments asked nothing. They quietly answered everything in advance. Kings understood that people noticed changes, even small ones. A different color, a new shape, or an unfamiliar decoration could cause whispers. And whispers could turn into doubts. It was safer to avoid them altogether. Clothing that had already been seen had already been judged. It had passed through time without trouble. It had been present at ceremonies, gatherings, and long, uneventful days. That history gave it value. There was also comfort in repetition. When days followed the same pattern, and clothing followed along with them, life felt more stable. A king could focus on responsibilities without being distracted by appearance. Tailors were instructed to recreate, not invent. Measurements were copied from older garments. Patterns were reused. The goal was sameness, not progress. In this way, kings preferred what already worked because it asked nothing new of the world. It blended quietly into routine. It did its job without drawing attention. And so, old clothing remained in use, not because it was exciting, but because it was safe. In a world where too much could change, the familiar fabric helped keep things still. Tradition was not something royal figures carried lightly. It rested on them, day after day, in ways both seen and unseen. Clothing was one of the most visible places where this weight could be felt. Every garment came with a history. It had been worn before. It had been approved before. It had been remembered before. Putting it on meant stepping into a long line of people who had done the same thing, in the same way, for many years. Royal clothing was not chosen freely. It was inherited, not just in fabric, but in meaning. A robe was not simply a robe. It represented expectations, customs, and memories that could not be ignored. To change even a small detail felt heavy. A different stitch or altered color could seem like turning away from the past. And turning away from the past was rarely encouraged. The past was trusted. It had already proven itself. When a ruler dressed, they were reminded of those who had stood before them. The clothing mirrored older portraits, older ceremonies, older days. This connection was constant, and it left little room for experimentation. The shoulders that wore these garments carried more than fabric. They carried the responsibility of continuity. Looking the same meant honoring what had come before. It meant showing respect without words. Servants and tailors understood this quiet pressure. They moved carefully, following old instructions. Their work was meant to preserve tradition, not challenge it. Over time, tradition became heavier not because it grew, but because it stayed. It stayed through decades, through generations, through moments of calm and uncertainty alike. Royal clothing held that weight without complaint. It stayed steady. And in doing so, it reminded everyone that some things were not meant to change quickly, if at all. In royal life, looking the same each day was not an accident. It was a quiet intention. Consistency was carefully maintained, from the smallest button to the broadest shape of a robe. Each morning followed a familiar pattern. The same garments were brought forward. The same layers were arranged in the same order. There was no moment of choice, only recognition. Today looked like yesterday, and yesterday looked like the day before. This sameness removed distraction. When clothing never changed, it no longer needed attention. It became part of the background, like the walls of the palace or the sound of footsteps in long halls. Looking the same helped create calm. People knew what to expect. Nothing felt surprising or uncertain. Familiar appearance reassured those who watched, even if they never thought about it directly. Royal figures did not dress to express mood or personality. Their clothing did not shift with emotion. Joy, worry, and boredom were hidden beneath fabric that always appeared steady. Tailors worked to preserve this repetition. They matched older garments exactly. Wear and tear were repaired quietly, without altering shape or style. The goal was invisibility, not improvement. Even changes in season were handled gently. Heavier fabrics replaced lighter ones, but the overall appearance stayed the same. The outline did not change. The colors remained familiar. Over time, this daily sameness became part of royal identity. To look different would feel wrong, almost unsettling. The comfort lay in not standing out. And so, dressing to look the same every day became a form of quiet discipline. It kept life predictable. It kept attention away from clothing. And it allowed everything else to move, slowly and calmly, without interruption. Stability did not appear suddenly in royal clothing. It was built slowly, thread by thread, over long periods of time. Fabric itself became a quiet tool for keeping things steady. The materials chosen for royal garments were selected for endurance. They were meant to last, to resist wear, and to age without changing their character. Softness was less important than reliability. Patterns were repeated deliberately. Once a weave proved strong and acceptable, it was used again and again. There was no reason to search for something new when the old had already done its job. Colors were fixed early. Dyes that held their shade were favored. It stayed close to the body, calm and controlled, reinforcing the sense of order. Tailors treated fabric with respect, knowing that change was not welcome. Their work aimed for consistency. The same textures were recreated, the same weights balanced, the same feel preserved. Over time, these fabrics became familiar not just to those who wore them, but to those who saw them. The sight of a known texture brought reassurance. It meant nothing unusual was happening. Stability, once woven into fabric, became difficult to remove. The cloth itself seemed to resist change. It held tradition in its threads. And so, royal clothing did more than cover the body. It carried steadiness quietly, helping everything around it remain slow, predictable, and calm. Time moved forward, but royal robes hardly noticed. Days turned into months, and months into years, yet the garments remained nearly the same. In some ways, they seemed to move more slowly than the calendar itself. The cut of a robe was decided once and then repeated. Sleeves fell to the same length. Collars rested in the same place. The shape did not follow time, time followed it instead. Seasons came and went quietly. Lighter fabrics were replaced with heavier ones, but the appearance stayed familiar. From a distance, nothing seemed different. Change was kept small and careful. These robes were not meant to mark passing years. They were meant to blur them. When people looked back, they remembered rulers dressed the same way, standing in the same posture, wearing the same calm expression. Even when decades passed, portraits looked alike. The fabric, the form, the presence, all echoed what had come before. The robe did not announce a new era. It gently continued the old one. Tailors worked from memory and record, not from imagination. Old patterns guided new work. Alterations were avoided unless absolutely necessary. Because of this, the robe became a constant. While the calendar changed its numbers, royal clothing remained steady, quietly reminding everyone that some things were not meant to move quickly. And so, these robes outlasted trends, moments, and moods, changing less than the days that passed around them. Colors in royal clothing were not selected lightly. Once chosen, they were rarely questioned again. A decision made long ago quietly shaped centuries of appearance. Certain shades became tied to authority. Deep reds, muted blues, soft golds, these colors were repeated until they felt permanent. Over time, they stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like rules. Changing a color could suggest change itself. It might hint at uncertainty or disruption. To avoid this, the familiar palette remained untouched, passing calmly from one generation to the next. Dyes were carefully prepared to match older tones. Tailors compared new fabric to worn garments, ensuring the color felt the same, even after years had passed. These colors became signals without words. People recognized them instantly. Seeing them meant order was still in place. Everything remained as expected. Even when brighter shades became available elsewhere, royal clothing stayed restrained. Loud color would draw attention, and attention was rarely desired. By keeping the same colors, royal figures blended into tradition. The palette stayed calm, steady, and unchanged. In this way, royal colors were chosen once and then kept forever, quietly holding the past and present together in the same soft shades. Familiar clothes carried a quiet sense of safety. They had been seen before, accepted before, and worn through ordinary days without trouble. Because of this, they felt dependable. In royal life, safety often meant predictability. When clothing looked the same, it suggested that nothing unexpected was happening. Familiar garments softened uncertainty without needing explanation. New clothes could invite attention. Attention could lead to questions. Questions could lead to doubt. Familiar clothing avoided all of this by blending calmly into routine. People trusted what they recognized. A known robe reassured them that traditions were being respected. It reminded them that the past was still guiding the present. For the wearer, familiarity brought comfort. There was no need to adjust to a new fit or unfamiliar weight. The clothing felt settled, as if it already belonged. Servants also found ease in repetition. They knew exactly how to prepare, arrange, and maintain garments they had handled many times before. Over years, familiar clothes became part of identity. To change them would feel unsettling, even unnecessary. And so, familiar clothing felt safer because it removed surprise, reduced uncertainty, and kept everything quietly under control. Royal tailors worked in a world where repetition was valued more than originality. Their success was measured by how closely they could recreate what already existed. Patterns were carefully preserved. Old measurements were recorded, copied, and reused. A design that had once been approved became a reference that guided years of work. These tailors did not chase innovation. They chased accuracy. A sleeve was cut to match an earlier sleeve. A seam followed the same line it always had. Small variations were corrected, not celebrated. Familiarity made their work calm. They knew each step well. There were no experiments, no sudden decisions. The rhythm of sewing remained steady and predictable. Even repairs were done with care. Worn fabric was replaced in a way that looked unchanged. The goal was to hide the passage of time, not reveal it. Through repetition, tailors became guardians of tradition. Their hands carried memory. Their work ensured that clothing looked the same year after year. In this quiet craft, repeating the same designs was not limitation. It was responsibility. And through that responsibility, royal clothing stayed still, steady, and reassuring. Life inside the palace moved at an unhurried pace. Days followed one another without sharp edges or sudden turns. This slow rhythm shaped everything, including the way people dressed. Mornings began quietly. Evenings ended the same way. Meals, walks, and ceremonies unfolded with careful timing. Clothing matched this pace, never rushing to change or adapt. There was little need for variety. When routines repeated, clothing repeated with them. The same garments appeared at the same moments, becoming part of the daily flow. Palace life valued calm over excitement. Loud change would have felt out of place. Clothing remained soft in presence, blending into the steady movement of the day. Servants moved slowly. Doors opened gently. Fabric brushed against stone floors without urgency. Everything reinforced the sense of order. In this environment, fashion had no reason to hurry. Time felt wide, and clothing followed along, unchanged and patient. The slow rhythm of palace life encouraged stillness. And within that stillness, royal clothing found its place, quiet, familiar, and always the same. New styles brought uncertainty, and uncertainty was something royal life preferred to avoid. Even small changes in appearance could feel larger than they were. A new style asked questions without speaking. Why now? Why different? What does it mean? These questions, once noticed, could not easily be dismissed. Familiar clothing had already been understood. It carried no surprises. New styles, however, had no history. They had not been tested by time or tradition. In royal settings, being noticed was not always desirable. Attention could lead to speculation. Speculation could disturb the calm order of the court. New designs also risked misunderstanding. A changed color or shape might suggest pride, rebellion, or carelessness, even if none was intended. Tailors and advisors knew this well. They guided rulers toward what was safe, what was known, what had already worked before. Because of this, new styles were approached slowly, if at all. Caution shaped clothing choices more than curiosity ever did. And so, new styles were seen as risky, not because they were wrong, but because the familiar was quieter, steadier, and far easier to trust. In royal life, clothing was rarely a personal decision. It functioned as a symbol long before it functioned as an outfit. What was worn carried meaning that went beyond comfort or preference. Each garment represented a role. A robe signaled authority. A certain color suggested restraint. An ornament marked permission or rank. These meanings were understood without explanation. Because of this, clothing could not be chosen freely. To change it would be to change the symbol itself. And symbols were meant to remain stable. Royal figures stepped into their clothing much like they stepped into their duties. Both were inherited. Both came with expectations. Neither invited experimentation. Even when a garment felt heavy or uncomfortable, it remained unchanged. Comfort mattered less than continuity. The symbol had to remain intact. Servants prepared clothing with care, knowing it would be seen and interpreted. Every fold and detail mattered, not for beauty, but for consistency. Over time, clothing stopped feeling like an option. It became part of the role itself. To dress differently would feel like stepping outside the position. And so, royal clothing existed as a symbol, not a choice, quietly communicating order, tradition, and steadiness without ever needing words. Ceremony shaped royal life in ways that were careful and deliberate. Every gesture, every word, and every garment followed strict patterns. Because of this, fashion rarely moved forward, it was frozen in place. Clothing for ceremonies was chosen not for style, but for ritual. A robe worn for a coronation, a wedding, or a diplomatic meeting had been seen before, and it would be seen again. Its meaning mattered more than its novelty. These garments had to be precise. A change in cut or color could disrupt the symbolic message. The public, watching carefully, expected to see familiar forms repeated exactly as tradition demanded. Tailors prepared months in advance, studying old records and portraits. Patterns were copied carefully. Fabrics were matched. Even small differences could feel like mistakes. The repetition of ceremonial clothing reinforced continuity. Generations looked the same in portraits, and centuries seemed connected by the calm constancy of dress. Outside the ceremonies, daily life might allow small variations. But during formal events, fashion became frozen. The robe, the sash, the crown, they all spoke the same language, unchanged by time. And so, in the quiet, deliberate world of royal ceremonies, fashion did not progress. Predictable dress also offered psychological ease. A robe that had been worn before, many times, felt like a steady presence. It reminded the wearer that some things were constant, even when decisions and responsibilities were not. Even attendants found peace in repetition. Preparing the same garments every day reduced mistakes and avoided tension. Everyone moved through their routines quietly, supported by the predictability of clothing. And so, the calm of familiar dress became more than habit. It became a small sanctuary within royal life, a gentle, unchanging presence that made even long, important days feel a little lighter. Time flowed gently through the palace, bringing one season after another, yet royal outfits barely noticed. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter, and still the garments remained familiar, unchanged in shape and color. Fabrics adjusted quietly to the weather. Lighter cloth for warmer days, heavier for colder ones, but the overall appearance stayed the same. A king or queen looked familiar no matter the season, a steady presence in an ever-moving world. This slow continuity offered reassurance. Courtiers and visitors saw the same outlines, the same muted colors, the same calm patterns. Change was almost imperceptible, and that was exactly the point. Even ceremonial garments followed the same rules. Seasonal variations were subtle and carefully controlled, preserving the look of consistency across months and years. And so, while leaves fell and snow drifted, royal clothing remained a constant, bridging time and seasons without drawing attention to itself, quietly supporting the rhythm of palace life. In royal life, clothing was never merely a personal preference, it was a symbol, a statement, and a reflection of order. Because of this, even the smallest change was treated with caution. Change was not just unexpected, it was considered disrespectful. To alter a garment, a color, or a style was to challenge the careful traditions that had been maintained for generations. It suggested carelessness, or worse, a desire to stand apart, to draw attention away from the role itself and toward the individual. Royal clothing carried meaning far beyond fabric and thread. It communicated hierarchy, authority, and continuity. Courtiers, attendants, and even visiting dignitaries understood these visual codes instinctively. Every garment was part of a silent language, and any deviation risked sending the wrong message. A new sleeve length, an unusual decoration, or a slightly brighter hue might appear trivial, but in the careful balance of palace life, it could be interpreted as arrogance, disrespect, or a break from proper conduct. Tailors and advisors reinforced this principle. They taught young royals to value tradition over whimsy, repetition over innovation. Wear what has been worn before, they advised, and do not question the choices of your predecessors. This guidance was not mere etiquette. It was practical. The palace was a world of scrutiny, where every decision, however small, was observed and judged. Familiar clothing reassured everyone, the ruler respected the rules, respected the ancestors, respected the people. Any change could disturb that delicate equilibrium. Even the royals themselves came to feel the weight of these expectations. Clothing was a daily reminder that their role was larger than their desires. It demanded consistency. It demanded obedience to tradition. To dress differently was not only risky, it could feel like betraying one's duty. The robes that had been passed down, carefully preserved, became both armor and guide. They sheltered the wearer from uncertainty, while also teaching restraint. Ceremonial garments highlighted this principle most clearly. A coronation, a festival, or a diplomatic reception required the utmost precision. Any variation from established attire could be seen as negligence or, in extreme cases, insult. Color, pattern, cut, and accessory were all predetermined, copied faithfully from earlier generations. Innovation was discouraged, not only because it might look odd, but because it could be read as disregard for history, ancestors, and the social order. Over time, this expectation became deeply ingrained. Change was not simply unnecessary, it was dangerous to tradition and reputation. Familiar clothing reinforced stability and continuity, while altered garments suggested rebellion, carelessness, or disregard for authority. In a palace where the weight of observation never lifted, respecting clothing traditions became an act of respect for everything the palace represented: history, order, and the continuity of royal life. And so, in a world where every detail mattered, change was considered disrespectful, not because it was inherently wrong, but because it disrupted the careful balance of meaning, ritual, and expectation that royal clothing carried with quiet dignity. It was safer, calmer, and wiser to remain consistent, day after day, year after year, letting the fabric itself honor the past while guiding the present. In royal families, clothing became a bridge between past, present, and future. Generations wore nearly the same outfits, each garment echoing what had come before. The robes of a king often resembled those of his father or grandfather, not by accident, but by careful design. The continuity reassured those within the palace and beyond, signaling that traditions were alive, respected, and unbroken. Tailors played a critical role in this quiet inheritance. They preserved old patterns, measured garments carefully, and recreated details exactly as they had been. Even minor differences were minimized. A sleeve, a collar, or an embroidered edge was copied with precision. Over time, the garments themselves became symbols, carrying stories of the rulers who had worn them and the ceremonies they had attended. For the royals themselves, this repetition brought calm. Wearing familiar clothing connected them to their lineage. The fabrics, colors, and styles had been tested by time. They conveyed a sense of belonging and identity. There was comfort in knowing that when they dressed, they were participating in a ritual that had lasted decades, sometimes centuries. Beyond the palace walls, this sameness held meaning for everyone who saw it. Subjects recognized continuity in dress as continuity in rule. A monarch dressed like their predecessor suggested stability and reassurance. The repetition of garments became a visual message: the leadership remained steady, the world remained in order, and history continued quietly alongside the present. Even ceremonial occasions reflected this principle. Portraits and public appearances repeated motifs that had been established long before. Generations could be traced through garments in art, as robes, tunics, and crowns passed almost unchanged from parent to child. This visual lineage reminded observers that royal life was built on tradition, not whim. Ultimately, wearing nearly the same clothes across generations helped preserve order and expectation. It reduced risk, minimized distraction, and reinforced the quiet power of consistency. In a world that valued calm and predictability, continuity in clothing was more than practical, it was essential. And so, royal families moved through time, their garments acting as silent witnesses. Each generation wore the echoes of the past, quietly honoring tradition, embodying stability, and showing the world that some things, even in a changing world, were meant to remain the same. In royal life, clothing gradually transformed from mere fabric into something far more important: a rulebook written in threads, patterns, and colors. Each garment carried instructions that guided not only the wearer but also everyone who observed them. What to wear, when to wear it, and how to wear it became part of a quiet, unwritten law. Tailors, advisors, and ceremonial officers enforced these rules without needing to speak. A robe was not simply a robe, it was a symbol of rank, responsibility, and tradition. Certain colors indicated authority, while specific trims and embroidery signaled hierarchy. Deviating from these standards was not just unusual, it was a violation of expectation. The rules were often detailed and precise. Sleeve lengths, collar heights, the width of sashes, even the type of fabric and stitch, all carried meaning. Generations of rulers followed these guidelines, refining them over time but rarely breaking them. Each garment became part of a living document, a code that connected the present to centuries of precedent. These rules helped maintain order within the palace. Courtiers understood who held power at a glance, and ceremonies unfolded smoothly because everyone recognized the visual language of authority. Clothing became a tool for communication without words, silently reinforcing hierarchy and protocol. For the royals themselves, the garments were a constant reminder of duty. Wearing the correct robe, with the correct adornments, reinforced their role and identity. It was a daily ritual, a practice of obedience to tradition, and a demonstration that the wearer respected the past. Even small adjustments were approached with care. A new pattern or color could suggest change or rebellion, and in the delicate ecosystem of the palace, change was often unwelcome. Thus, consistency became more than convenience, it became a responsibility. Over time, royal clothing was no longer optional or expressive. It was a living rulebook, guiding behavior, reinforcing protocol, and preserving history. Each stitch, fold, and hue reminded everyone that tradition, not whim, ruled the day. And so, when royal clothing became a rulebook, the palace itself became a place where stability reigned. The garments quietly dictated what was right, proper, and expected, ensuring that the rhythm of royal life moved with calm precision and measured continuity. Court life moved slowly, with long hours, formal ceremonies, and careful observation. In this environment, the calm repetition of court attire became a quiet anchor, holding the palace together in steady order. Every day, courtiers and royalty wore garments that had been seen many times before. Sleeves, collars, sashes, and tunics followed familiar patterns. Nothing startled the eye, nothing demanded attention. This repetition created a sense of predictability that was deeply reassuring. Ceremonial robes were particularly consistent. Portraits across decades show similar garments, colors, and shapes. The repetition signaled continuity, connecting generations and reassuring both the people in the court and the public outside the palace walls. Tailors and attendants reinforced this calm by carefully maintaining the clothing. Repairs were subtle, patterns were preserved, and fabrics were replaced only when necessary. Every garment returned to its place as if nothing had changed. The effect was profound. When everyone wore familiar attire, interactions became smoother. The focus remained on rituals, conversations, and responsibilities rather than clothing. There was a quiet order in seeing the same lines, colors, and forms each day. Even visitors and diplomats noticed the repetition. Familiar court attire indicated stability and respect for tradition. New or unusual garments might create distraction or doubt, but repeated attire conveyed calm authority. Over time, the repetition became more than habit, it became rhythm. Each day, each ceremony, each portrait reinforced the same visual story: the court is orderly, predictable, and steadfast. And so, the calm repetition of court attire quietly shaped palace life. It reinforced hierarchy, steadied daily routines, and allowed the world inside and outside the palace to move gently, comfortably, and without unnecessary surprise. Royal clothing often appeared elaborate and extravagant at first glance, but beneath the richness of fabrics, embroidery, and jewels lay a quiet simplicity. This simplicity was carefully preserved, hidden beneath layers of luxury, ensuring that the garments served their true purpose: stability, continuity, and tradition. Luxury caught the eye, but the underlying structure was plain and steady. Robes were cut in familiar shapes, collars followed established lines, and hems remained consistent. Patterns were repeated from older garments, ensuring that no sudden innovation disrupted the calm order of court life. Even the most ornate details were designed to echo the past rather than announce something new. This hidden simplicity made clothing easier to manage. Tailors could repair and recreate garments without altering their essential form. Fabrics, though rich in appearance, were chosen for durability and reliability. Layers could be adjusted for warmth or comfort without changing the overall impression of the outfit. Luxury served another purpose: it distracted attention from what truly mattered. People admired the richness of jewels or the sheen of silk, but the clothing's consistency and symbolism went unnoticed. In this way, the palace maintained calm order. Extravagance impressed without introducing risk, while simplicity ensured the garments remained functional and predictable. Royal figures themselves felt comfort in this balance. They could display wealth and authority through color, ornament, and texture while relying on the familiar structure beneath. Each day, the weight of tradition rested lightly, supported by garments that looked grand but moved quietly with routine. Even in ceremonies, simplicity guided the design of robes. Embroidery and decoration followed established patterns, maintaining consistency across generations. The eye noticed luxury, but the mind absorbed stability. This combination allowed royals to appear impressive without disrupting the order that defined palace life. And so, simplicity was hidden behind luxury. Not for secrecy, but for harmony. The rich fabrics and intricate adornments provided visual spectacle, while the plain, unchanging structures beneath kept the palace calm, predictable, and reassuring. Royal clothing, in its quiet wisdom, reminded everyone that beauty and stability could coexist without chaos. Royal garments were not made for a single season or a passing trend. They were made to endure, to last decades, and sometimes to be passed down through generations. Every stitch, seam, and fold was designed with longevity in mind. Fabrics were chosen for durability. Heavy silks, tightly woven wool, and fine linens could withstand years of wear if properly cared for. Even delicate embroidery was reinforced carefully, so that each detail could survive time without fading or fraying. Tailors understood that a garment's lifespan was as important as its appearance. Maintenance became part of the process. Worn areas were repaired discreetly, loose threads reattached, and fabrics cleaned with methods that preserved color and strength. Nothing was thrown away lightly. Each robe, coat, or tunic carried history, and that history needed protection. This longevity reinforced stability. When garments were reused over decades, they became symbols of consistency. Generations could recognize familiar shapes and colors, tying the present to the past. Clothing, in this sense, was more than fabric, it was memory, carefully preserved. Even ceremonial robes were crafted to endure. Coronations, festivals, and official portraits all demanded clothing that could survive repeated use without losing its dignity or meaning. A well-made robe could appear in multiple generation ceremonies, linking rulers through visual continuity. Durable clothing also brought comfort to the wearer. Knowing that a garment could be relied upon for many years reduced worry and distraction. A familiar robe that had endured time offered reassurance, a steady presence in a life filled with responsibilities. And so, royal clothing was crafted to last. It was a quiet testament to patience, care, and tradition. Each garment carried the weight of decades, reminding everyone that in the palace, as in life, endurance mattered more than novelty, and stability was found not in change, but in the slow, careful preservation of what had already proven itself. In royal life, blending in was often more important than being noticed. Standing out, even through clothing, could draw attention that was neither wanted nor safe. Garments were chosen to maintain harmony, not to highlight individuality. Bright colors, unusual patterns, or new styles could seem exciting, but they also carried risk. A single unexpected detail might catch the eye of courtiers, visiting dignitaries, or even rivals. In a world where appearances were watched closely, drawing unnecessary attention was avoided at all costs. Royal clothing followed established forms for a reason. Familiar robes, sashes, and tunics communicated calm authority. They told the court and the public that the ruler respected tradition, hierarchy, and expectations. To stand out might suggest pride, rebellion, or carelessness. Even an innocent attempt at novelty could be misinterpreted. Tailors and advisors carefully guided every choice. Subtle changes were made only when absolutely necessary, and even then, they were tested against past garments to ensure they did not disrupt the quiet uniformity of palace life. The goal was reassurance, not admiration. For the royals themselves, wearing familiar, predictable clothing created comfort. There was no anxiety about offending observers or making mistakes. The garments fit into a long line of tradition, allowing the wearer to focus on duties rather than personal expression. Over time, the fear of standing out reinforced repetition. Generations dressed similarly, echoing their predecessors in every fold and color. Clothing became a tool for invisibility as much as authority, present, impressive, but never provocative. And so, royal attire avoided extremes. It was carefully restrained, steady, and consistent. By not standing out, it strengthened the calm rhythm of court life, maintaining order, tradition, and the quiet dignity expected of those who wore it. In royal life, what had been worn once often became more than tradition, it became law. Garments that proved acceptable in the past were carefully preserved, copied, and enforced, creating a quiet system where clothing itself followed rules as strict as any written decree. When a design was approved by a previous ruler, it gained authority. The cut of a robe, the length of a sleeve, or the shade of a dye was no longer simply a preference, it became a standard to be followed. Courtiers, tailors, and ceremonial officers all learned these standards and ensured they were maintained. Deviating from them could be seen as disrespectful, careless, or even rebellious. Tailors were trained to replicate designs exactly, not to innovate. Measurements were recorded meticulously, patterns were copied, and every stitch aimed to match the original. Even repairs were done to maintain the design, not to alter it. In this way, old clothing became a living law, continuously enforced without words. Ceremonial garments were particularly rigid. Crowns, robes, and sashes had specific designs that linked rulers across generations. Wearing them correctly was a matter of protocol. Portraits and records preserved the standards, ensuring that each successor dressed exactly as expected. The effect was powerful. Clothing became a visual rulebook, signaling authority, stability, and obedience. The public and courtiers alike recognized these signals instantly, reinforcing social order and continuity. To wear old designs was to honor tradition, to alter them risked disrupting it. Even everyday attire followed the principle. Familiar robes were worn not because they were exciting, but because they were approved, tested, and codified through repeated use. Generations learned to dress in ways that maintained the balance of the court. Over time, These repeated designs created a culture where clothing itself held authority. Fabrics, cuts, and colors spoke of law as much as the spoken word. Royal fashion was not about novelty, it was about following precedent, preserving continuity, and respecting the invisible rules that had grown from centuries of repetition. And so, old designs became law, quietly guiding behavior, maintaining stability, and ensuring that royal clothing fulfilled its true purpose, to carry tradition forward, unchanging and unchallenged, from one generation to the next. Outside the palace walls, the world moved quickly. Markets buzzed, merchants introduced new fabrics, and fashions changed from town to town. Yet inside the palace, dressing was deliberate, careful, and slow. Each step followed long-established routines, creating a calm contrast to the hurried world beyond the gates. Mornings began with quiet preparation. Garments were carefully selected, measured, and adjusted. Tailors and attendants moved deliberately, ensuring that every fold, seam, and accessory was placed correctly. Nothing was rushed. The goal was precision, not speed. Royal figures themselves followed this slow rhythm. Dressing was a ritual, a process that required focus and respect for tradition. Every garment recalled generations past, every pattern had meaning, and every color carried symbolism. In this slow practice, the palace created continuity that the outside world could not influence. Even when outside trends offered new fabrics or bold designs, the palace remained unchanged. Novelty was distracting, unnecessary, and potentially risky. Familiar robes and established cuts kept everything orderly and predictable, reinforcing the authority and stability of the rulers. Slow dressing also reduced mistakes. In a world of scrutiny, a misaligned collar, a crooked sash, or an unfamiliar accessory could invite criticism or doubt. By moving carefully, the royals and their attendants ensured that appearance reflected steadiness, calm, and proper observance of tradition. Over time, the contrast between the fast-changing world and the deliberate pace of palace life became part of its identity. The outside could rush and innovate, but within the walls, repetition, patience, and care prevailed. Clothing was more than protection or adornment, it was a tool of order, guiding behavior and perception alike. And so, in a world that constantly sought newness, dressing slowly became a quiet form of resistance. It preserved the wisdom of the past, respected the present, and ensured that royal life moved at a measured, calm pace, regardless of the chaos beyond the palace gates. Trends promised novelty, but novelty carried uncertainty. Royals avoided them not out of stubbornness, but out of careful calculation. Clothing was a statement of stability, authority, and tradition, and following fleeting fashions could undermine all three. Trends changed quickly. What was admired today could be dismissed tomorrow. In the palace, where appearances were scrutinized constantly, adopting something new risked attention, gossip, and misinterpretation. A bright color, an unusual cut, or an experimental decoration could suggest arrogance or carelessness, even if the intention was harmless. Instead, royals chose continuity. Familiar shapes, repeated patterns, and trusted colors ensured that their appearance always reflected order, not whim. Clothing became a visual reassurance that tradition remained intact, that authority was steady, and that the palace was a place of predictability. Even tailors followed this principle. Their work was measured against garments that had proven acceptable for generations. Innovation was rarely welcome. Success was judged not by creativity, but by faithfulness to precedent. Every stitch, fold, and seam reinforced stability. Avoiding trends also protected the ruler from distraction. When clothing remained predictable, attention could focus on duties, ceremonies, and decisions. A ruler's appearance would not overshadow their responsibilities. In portraits, processions, and ceremonies, repeated garments created continuity across time. Generations could be traced through familiar robes and familiar adornments. And so, by avoiding trends, royals maintained calm, respect, and order. They dressed not to impress, but to reassure. They wore clothing that had been proven and trusted, ensuring that the palace remained a space of quiet stability in a world that never stopped changing. Palace fashion moved at a pace so slow that it often felt almost boring. Garments were repeated, patterns followed, and colors remained familiar year after year. To outsiders, this might have seemed dull, but for those inside, it brought quiet comfort. Each day, robes were worn in the same order. Collars, sleeves, and hems were consistent. Even small details, like embroidery or trim, followed long-established designs. There was no rush, no excitement, and no sudden change. Just calm, gentle repetition. This boredom had a purpose. In a world full of scrutiny, novelty could attract attention, disrupt protocol, or invite criticism. The familiarity of palace fashion reassured everyone. Courtiers, visitors, and the royals themselves knew exactly what to expect. Stability was embedded in each thread. Tailors and attendants carried out their work with slow precision. Every fold and placement was deliberate. Repetition became rhythm. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the robes looked just as they had decades ago, maintaining continuity across generations. Even ceremonial events reflected this gentle boredom. The garments were majestic, yes, but predictable. There was no surprise in a coronation robe or a royal sash, only the serene, comforting repetition of centuries of tradition. And so, the gentle boredom of palace fashion was not emptiness, it was reassurance. In repetition, there was calm. In sameness, there was order. And in slow, deliberate clothing, the palace found a quiet strength that required no excitement at all. In royal life, clothing was carefully selected not to impress, but to blend. Attention was a double-edged sword. Admired too much, a ruler could seem vain, noticed too little, and authority might appear weak. Garments were chosen to strike a quiet balance, maintaining respect while avoiding unnecessary scrutiny. Familiar colors, shapes, and fabrics helped achieve this. Robes echoed those worn by previous generations, patterns repeated in subtle ways, and embellishments were restrained. Nothing screamed novelty. Nothing invited gossip. Each garment allowed the wearer to appear steady, composed, and predictable. Even luxury was tempered. Silk, gold thread, or embroidery was used sparingly, enough to suggest dignity, but never enough to dominate attention. The focus remained on ritual, duty, and the continuity of tradition, not on personal flair. Tailors and attendants understood the unspoken rule: clothing should serve the palace, not the wearer's ego. Every fold, stitch, and accessory was guided by precedent. Small deviations were quietly discouraged, for even a minor change could disrupt the calm equilibrium of the court. For royals themselves, this approach offered security. Familiar garments removed the worry of offending observers or drawing unwanted commentary. Wearing the same robes and adhering to established styles allowed them to move through days, ceremonies, and portraits without distraction. In this way, clothing became a tool of discretion. It communicated authority without spectacle, presence without provocation, and continuity without disruption. In a palace that valued stability above all, garments chosen to avoid attention quietly reinforced the calm, orderly rhythm of royal life. In the palace, tailoring was not a creative adventure, it was a quiet, careful routine. Each day, tailors followed the same patterns, measured the same lengths, and prepared the same fabrics. Their work was guided by centuries of precedent, repetition, and precision. Rulers and courtiers depended on this consistency. Every garment needed to meet exact standards, from collar height to sleeve length. Even the smallest error could be noticed and interpreted, so tailors approached each task methodically, relying on skill honed through years of repetition. Patterns were stored, measurements recorded, and designs copied faithfully. New creations were rare, most work focused on preserving the familiar. Repairs, adjustments, and seasonal changes were executed with care, ensuring that each garment retained its original form. This routine extended to ceremonial clothing as well. Coronation robes, sashes, and formal tunics followed detailed templates. They were recreated precisely for each occasion, reinforcing continuity across generations. The process became second nature, slow, deliberate, and almost meditative. Even the royals came to expect this steady rhythm. The preparation of garments became part of daily life, a calm start to mornings that might otherwise have been busy or stressful. Tailoring was a predictable element in a world of duties, decisions, and formalities. And so, when tailoring became routine, it ensured that royal clothing remained consistent, stable, and dependable. Every stitch, fold, and detail served not creativity, but the quiet, reassuring continuity of palace life. The palace itself moved in rhythm with the hands of the tailors, steady and calm, one garment at a time. In royal life, unchanged style held a quiet, almost invisible power. Garments that remained consistent across years and generations communicated stability, authority, and respect for tradition, without a single word being spoken. The impact of familiar clothing was subtle but profound. Courtiers, visitors, and subjects recognized the repeated shapes, colors, and patterns immediately. These visual cues reassured everyone that the ruler upheld continuity, valued order, and honored the past. There was authority in familiarity, a calm command that needed no announcement. Unchanged style also protected the wearer. By avoiding novelty, rulers minimized risk. No bold color or unusual cut could distract, invite gossip, or suggest instability. Clothing became a shield, quietly reinforcing confidence while maintaining discretion. Tailors, advisors, and attendants contributed to this power. Their careful replication of patterns and fabrics ensured that garments remained true to tradition. Each stitch echoed the past, and each fold preserved a sense of order, creating a rhythm that subtly influenced perception and behavior throughout the palace. Even in ceremonies, portraits, and public appearances, the unchanged style spoke louder than any speech or decree. Generations could be traced through robes and sashes that looked nearly identical, linking rulers to their ancestors and reassuring observers that leadership remained constant. Ultimately, the power of unchanged style was silent because it worked without spectacle. It demanded no attention, yet shaped perceptions of authority, continuity, and respect. In the palace, where every detail mattered, consistency in clothing became a quiet force, steady, unassuming, and profoundly effective. And so, royal fashion did not need to dazzle. Its true strength lay in repetition, reliability, and the calm certainty that some things, like authority and tradition, were best expressed through enduring, unchanging style. In the palace, royal dress was almost never questioned. This was not because people lacked curiosity, but because clothing carried meaning far beyond personal taste. Garments represented authority, tradition, and continuity, concepts that were rarely challenged openly. Every color, pattern, and cut had been established long before. Robes, sashes, and crowns were symbols encoded with unspoken rules. To question them was to question the order of the court, the wisdom of ancestors, or even the legitimacy of the ruler themselves. Courtiers and attendants understood this and rarely spoke about garments except to ensure they met established standards. Familiarity also discouraged doubt. Generations of repeated designs created an expectation that clothing was correct by default. Portraits, ceremonies, and public appearances reinforced this perception. A robe seen in multiple generations became unquestionable simply because it had endured. Longevity implied correctness. Additionally, questioning clothing could invite attention, a risk many were unwilling to take. The palace valued discretion and calm. Commenting on a minor detail of dress might appear disrespectful or even subversive. Observers learned to watch quietly rather than critique openly. Even the royals themselves internalized this principle. Wearing traditional garments reminded them of their role and duty. They rarely considered alternatives because the existing clothing had been tested over time, proving itself suitable, safe, and symbolic. Ultimately, royal dress was rarely questioned because it functioned as a living language of power and tradition. Its consistency communicated stability, reinforced hierarchy, and minimized risk. In a world governed by observation, protocol, and unspoken rules, the quiet authority of clothing went unquestioned, and in doing so, maintained the calm, ordered rhythm of palace life. The halls of the palace echoed with quiet steps, soft whispers, and the subtle rustle of fabrics. In these spaces, familiar fabrics played an important role, not just in comfort, but in creating a sense of calm and continuity. Robes, cloaks, and tunics were made of materials that had been used for generations. Silks, woolens, and linens were chosen for their durability and consistency. Their textures were known to the touch, their weight predictable, and their movement familiar. Each step through marble corridors or timbered halls carried the soft reassurance of tradition. This familiarity comforted both the royals and those around them. Courtiers recognized the same drape of a sleeve or the same shimmer of a fabric as they had seen in previous portraits or ceremonies. The repetition of materials became part of the palace's rhythm, signaling that nothing had changed, and order remained intact. Even small details mattered. A worn edge, a carefully mended seam, or a familiar lining all contributed to the sense of continuity. Fabrics were not only seen. They were felt, creating an unspoken connection between past and present. Tailors maintained these materials with care. Repairs were done subtly to preserve the original texture, color, and feel. Nothing about the fabric called attention to itself, it existed to support steadiness, not spectacle. In the quiet halls of the palace, familiar fabrics became more than cloth. They were part of a living tradition, carrying history, authority, and calm through every corridor. The rustle of fabric was a gentle reminder that, even as time moved forward outside, the palace remained steady, predictable, and timeless. In the palace, clothing was never just decoration, it was a visual language of hierarchy. The cut of a robe, the colors chosen, and the embellishments worn all signaled rank, authority, and position within the carefully ordered world of the court. Royal garments were designed to stand apart. Deep, rich colors like crimson or navy, fine fabrics, and intricate embroidery distinguished rulers from courtiers. Even small details, a jeweled clasp, an ornate trim, or a patterned sash, communicated status at a glance. Those who observed could instantly recognize authority without a word being spoken. Hierarchy extended beyond royalty to attendants and officials. Every level of the court had its own prescribed attire. Tailors ensured that these distinctions were maintained perfectly, reinforcing the social order visually. Courtiers could never wear the colors or fabrics reserved for the monarch. To do so would be considered disrespectful, even dangerous. Repetition of familiar designs strengthened the hierarchy. Generations of rulers maintained the same robes, while their advisors and attendants wore their assigned garments. The visual differences became ingrained in everyone's understanding, silently guiding behavior and maintaining respect for the chain of command. Even ceremonial occasions relied on clothing to enforce order. Processions, formal gatherings, and portraits all displayed the hierarchy clearly. The arrangement of colors, patterns, and garments told a story of authority, duty, and rank that everyone could read. Ultimately, clothing in the palace did more than cover the body, it reinforced structure. By signaling rank and position, it maintained calm, predictable social order. The visual language of attire made hierarchy unquestionable, and in doing so, strengthened the stability and dignity of royal life. Royal appearance was designed to be predictable, steady, and reassuring. From robes and sashes to collars and crowns, every detail followed familiar patterns that had been repeated for generations. This predictability created a quiet sense of order, both for the royals themselves and for everyone who observed them. When a ruler appeared in public, courtiers and visitors instinctively recognized the shapes, colors, and adornments. There was comfort in knowing what to expect. Familiar robes, muted colors, and repeated designs signaled stability and authority without needing explanation. Predictability also helped the royals focus. With clothing that was tested and approved over decades, there was no need to worry about fashion choices or appearances. Every morning began with a routine that reinforced continuity and minimized uncertainty. Even in ceremonies and portraits, the same garments appeared repeatedly. Each generation mirrored the last, creating continuity across time. The familiar sight of robes, sashes, and crowns reinforced the calm rhythm of palace life, reminding everyone that tradition remained intact. Ultimately, the calm predictability of royal appearance was more than habit. It was a deliberate choice, a visual tool that maintained order, reassured observers, and reinforced the authority and dignity of those who wore it. In a world that could be uncertain and changing, predictable clothing became a symbol of constancy, quietly holding the palace together. In royal life, comfort often took precedence over creativity. Clothing was worn for long hours, in formal ceremonies, during endless meetings, and through countless duties. Garments needed to support the wearer quietly, without distraction, rather than serve as a canvas for personal expression. Familiar fabrics, predictable cuts, and repeated designs provided this comfort. A robe that had been worn before fit as expected, felt familiar to the touch, and allowed movement without hesitation. Royals did not need to adjust collars, sleeves, or sashes constantly. Every garment functioned as intended, minimizing discomfort and uncertainty. Creativity, on the other hand, introduced risk. New designs, unusual colors, or elaborate embellishments could attract attention or provoke criticism. Clothing was not a place for experimentation because appearances in the palace carried meaning beyond fashion. They carried authority, reputation, and tradition. Tailors focused on practicality as much as aesthetics. Heavy embroidery was reinforced to prevent wear, seams were aligned precisely, and fabrics were chosen for durability. Even luxurious garments were constructed to endure long hours of use, blending elegance with reliability. Comfort also had a psychological effect. Familiar, well-fitting clothing gave the wearer confidence and peace of mind. There was no need to worry about whether a new sleeve looked right, whether a sash was properly draped, or whether a color was acceptable. Predictable garments allowed the ruler to move through days of responsibility with calm efficiency. Ultimately, royal clothing prioritized function over novelty. Creativity might delight the eye, but comfort ensured the smooth continuation of palace life. In a world governed by tradition, hierarchy, and ceremony, the quiet reliability of clothing mattered far more than the fleeting excitement of innovation. And so, comfort became a guiding principle. Garments supported, reassured, and maintained order, allowing royals to perform their duties with steadiness, while leaving creativity to quietly exist in subtle details, if at all. In the palace, clothing was crafted not for the fleeting moment, but for the ages. Every robe, sash, and crown was designed with history in mind, to be recognized by future generations as a symbol of continuity and tradition. Royals dressed for history, not for tomorrow. The choice of fabrics, colors, and patterns followed precedent. A garment worn in a coronation or official portrait might be repeated for decades, connecting rulers across time. Each stitch and fold carried meaning, echoing the authority of predecessors and reinforcing the visual language of the palace. Innovation was rare. New styles could be misinterpreted, suggesting instability, carelessness, or vanity. Clothing that remained consistent ensured that the ruler's appearance reflected order and respect for the lineage, rather than personal whims or short-lived trends. Ceremonial garments amplified this principle. Portraits preserved the exact robes, sashes, and adornments, allowing future generations to recognize continuity. Even everyday attire reflected this philosophy. The familiar shapes and patterns were deliberately repeated to maintain the thread of history. Tailors worked with care, copying patterns, matching colors, and reinforcing fabrics to ensure longevity. Every garment was a bridge between past and present, a tangible reminder that authority and tradition endured beyond the immediate moment. Dressing for history also influenced perception. Observers saw not only the individual before them but also the weight of lineage and the quiet authority of generations. Clothing became a tool for teaching respect, stability, and patience. And so, royal attire was never about novelty or future fashion. It was about legacy, preservation, and the slow, steady march of time. Each garment whispered that the present was anchored in the past, and that tradition, not haste, guided the palace forward. In royal life, repetition was more than habit. It was a form of respect. Wearing the same garments, following the same patterns, and adhering to established colors signaled reverence for tradition, ancestors, and the careful order of the palace. Repeated designs reminded everyone of continuity. When a ruler donned a familiar robe, it connected them to those who had come before, reinforcing the unbroken line of authority. Courtiers, attendants, and visitors recognized this visual language instantly, understanding that each choice honored history and upheld protocol. Tailors played a key role in this ritual. They carefully preserved measurements, patterns, and fabrics, ensuring that garments could be repeated faithfully. Even ceremonial robes were copied precisely, their familiar lines conveying the calm authority of tradition. Repetition also offered practical benefits. Familiar garments fit perfectly, minimized risk, and allowed the wearer to focus on duties without distraction. At the same time, they communicated stability to the court and the public. When clothing remained unchanged, it reassured observers that the palace functioned smoothly and respectfully. Over time, each garment, repeated carefully over years and generations, reinforced tradition, stability, and respect. In the quiet rhythm of clothing, the palace found a language of reverence that required no words at all. Royal fashion moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, creating a sense of lasting stillness that defined palace life. Garments did not follow trends or whims, they followed tradition, creating continuity across generations. Robes, sashes, and ceremonial outfits retained familiar shapes, colors, and patterns. Each stitch, fold, and trim had been carefully preserved and repeated, ensuring that nothing distracted from the calm dignity of the court. The stillness of clothing reflected the stillness of authority itself. Tailors maintained this calm with meticulous care. Repairs were subtle, fabrics were reinforced, and designs were copied faithfully. Even ceremonial garments, worn for decades and generations, retained their original form. Every detail contributed to a visual consistency that reassured both the palace and the outside world. The effect on observers was profound. Courtiers, attendants, and visitors immediately recognized familiar garments. That recognition brought comfort, respect, and confidence. Clothing became a visual anchor, signaling that, in a world of change, it remained constant. In a palace of ceremony, it offered calm. Through slow repetition, careful preservation, and enduring patterns, royal clothing became more than attire, it became a symbol of timeless authority, steady presence, and enduring tradition. In the palace, change was always measured, deliberate, and slow. Clothing, in particular, evolved at a pace so gentle that it often went unnoticed. This slowness was not merely tradition. It created a sense of safety for royals, courtiers, and everyone who moved through palace life. Familiar garments provided reassurance. A robe worn for decades, a sash repeated across generations, or a ceremonial tunic seen in countless portraits offered certainty. Everyone knew what to expect. There were no surprises, no sudden shifts in color or style that might disrupt the calm rhythm of daily life. Slow change also minimized risk. Fashion was more than appearance, it was authority, hierarchy, and protocol in cloth. Introducing something new too quickly could be misinterpreted, provoking criticism or confusion. By allowing alterations to occur gradually, the palace ensured that clothing evolved without threatening stability. Tailors and advisors reinforced this principle. Patterns were adjusted slowly, fabrics were replaced carefully, and decorations were updated only when absolutely necessary. Every step was deliberate, creating continuity while accommodating the practical needs of time and wear. For the royals themselves, this approach brought comfort. Familiar clothing reduced anxiety, allowing rulers to focus on duties rather than appearance. They could move through ceremonies, meetings, and portraits with confidence, knowing that their garments reinforced tradition and respect. Even observers felt the effect. Courtiers, diplomats, and visitors recognized continuity in dress as continuity in authority. Slow change communicated patience, wisdom, and steadiness, qualities valued in leadership. Clothing became a silent reassurance, a protective rhythm that guided perception and maintained calm. And so, slow change felt like safety because it preserved order. By evolving gently, clothing maintained tradition, reinforced hierarchy, and provided both wearer and observer with confidence. In a world of responsibilities and scrutiny, measured evolution in fashion was more than practical, it was a quiet shield of stability that kept the palace steady through time. Royal clothing carried a quiet power that lasted far longer than any fleeting trend. Across centuries, robes, sashes, tunics, and ceremonial garments maintained a calm consistency that defined palace life. Their purpose was not to impress with novelty, but to reassure, stabilize, and symbolize authority. The endurance of these garments created continuity. Generations wore similar robes, followed the same patterns, and adhered to familiar colors. Portraits, ceremonies, and daily routines all reflected this steadiness, signaling to courtiers, visitors, and subjects alike that tradition remained unbroken. Tailors, attendants, and advisors ensured that every stitch, seam, and fold preserved the past. Repairs were discreet, patterns were copied precisely, and fabrics were chosen to last. Even luxurious embellishments served the same goal, to reinforce stability without introducing risk or distraction. For the royals themselves, this calm was practical as well as symbolic. Familiar clothing reduced anxiety, allowed focus on duties, and provided a steady presence in the constant scrutiny of court life. There was no need for experimentation, predictability itself carried authority. Even observers felt the effect. The repetition and consistency of royal garments communicated trustworthiness, order, and wisdom. Clothing became more than decoration, it became a silent teacher, showing that leadership was rooted in continuity and care. And so, the enduring calm of royal clothing was its greatest strength. Through repetition, preservation, and careful attention, garments carried the weight of history while maintaining a serene rhythm in the present. In the palace, this calm was not just aesthetic. It was the quiet foundation of authority, respect, and timeless tradition.